First story. Father, 60, left my mother, 65, for prostitute, 55, and is now trying to take everything from us. First of all, before anybody continues reading, trigger alert. This story contains scenes of overt violence and mental abuse. This story begins in May of 2023, even though I had a lot of misfortunes the prior 3 years, which, as we'll later find out, was entirely my father's doing since he hated me long before I knew it. One day in May of last year, out of the blue and just days after Mom actually asked him whether he had an affair, which he denied, my father announced that he fell in love with another woman. My mom was shocked and hurt, and my father was at first acting courteous and nice towards her. It's important to know that my father suffers from narcissistic personality disorder. Rather, he has NPD, but everybody else in his proximity is the one suffering due to it. For the longest time, my mom wasn't aware of the ramifications of this, but I've had to deal with a narcissist before, so this isn't my first rodeo. Soon it became clear to us why he was being nice. He actually fears a divorce, which would be the death knell to his business. It was therefore no surprise to me when his demeanor changed after the first week, and he soon suggested that Mom should stay married to him and remember the good times and what we built together. After that failed to impress Mom, the threats started coming in. One day, I was working from my home office when Mom came rushing in, crying. She told me my father had just told her if they get a divorce, he'll lock her inside the house and burn it down with her in it. When I confronted him about it, he immediately denied it, then, typical of NPD, slowly admitted it while also trying to rationalize his cruel behavior. When I tried to speak with him again a day later, he threatened me with a loaded crossbow. His insanity went on for an entire summer, and I genuinely feared for Mom's life. One weekend in September, then I took her on a weekend trip to see my brother and relax herself a little. During the trip, my father's girlfriend's pimp contacted us. At that point in time, we didn't know he was a pimp. We thought he was merely a concerned ex. He spent 30 minutes on the phone with Mom and told us a wild story about how my father essentially kidnapped his girlfriend and took her east to introduce her to his family, despite her vehement pleas not to. We kind of bought into the story because it fit my father's obsessive and uncaring nature. Later on, we found out this was just a way to test our reaction and punishing us for believing it. When we returned on Monday, somewhat carefree, Mom found her suitcase and a letter on the porch. The letter accused Mom of being manipulative and trying to ruin his new relationship, and told her to accept reality. At the door, I realized that he had not only changed the locks but boarded himself in like a complete lunatic. I called the police, but unfortunately, the cop that arrived was one of my father's friends, and he outright mocked us and likewise told us to accept reality. That cop has since been relocated to another precinct. I at least managed that much after much pressure. He suggested that Mom move into my place for the time being, but my father was adamant that she move into my father's and his girlfriend's former love nest. We decided then and there that she'd live with me for a while, but nonetheless, our curiosity made us check the place him and his girlfriend had cohabited for the past year or two. The place was unspectacular but quite dirty. All their clothes were still strewn along, documents were planted on the table, chairs, and even the floor. The bed was soiled. It was disgusting, so we left and Mom settled in with me. Fast forward 2 days and all of a sudden one of my father's friends who had recently moved to Kiel phoned us. He was quite angry and kept insisting that my mom and I stole the key to his shop that he had entrusted to my father, and that my father was also missing a loan agreement my father had made with his new girlfriend. He loaned her 3,000 euros for vehicle repairs. For a car that is now mainly operated by the ex-boyfriend. We eventually calmed him down while also confronting him in regards to whatever he may have known about my father's affair. As it turns out, that poor sob didn't know the name of my father's new love, and if he had known it, he for sure would have broken down. The same woman my father is dating turns out to have dated that guy just months prior to meeting my father. They were a couple for 2 years, even though he himself is married, and everybody in town assumed his secret girlfriend was still with her original boyfriend. The same way she treated him, she's treating my father now in front of her friends. She regularly denies being with him and seems ashamed of him. She only ended it with him after he eventually manned up and put his wife on the title of the house. Later that day, I spoke to a friendly gas station attendant who, as it turned out, not only knows my mom and me well, but also knows my father's girlfriend and the guy she dated before my father. As it turns out, that woman is well known in town, and has been dating many married men throughout the years. And the ex, it turns out, isn't her ex-boyfriend, but her pimp. I confronted my father with this information, but he just called me names and claimed I was dumb, and that his relationship to her is totally different from all the prior ones. That marked the last time I even tried to use reason with him. 6 weeks after he had forcibly removed Mom from her own home, with a suitcase that only contained shoes, a towel, and a singular nightgown, a judge was finally hearing the case and ruled that my father has to immediately restore my mother to the house. Which he did, after much pressure, 9 days later. Shortly before Christmas, I started a new job, and despite all the pressure and hurt at home, managed myself rather well. Mom was really proud, and even though it was a sad Christmas, we tried to make the best of it and forget the fact that my father is celebrating it with somebody else, at our house that we built together. New Year's Eve, I invited Mom for dinner. The evening was joyous, and for a brief moment we forgot about our family drama. Unfortunately, this was not to last. Eager to have us permanently removed from the premises as quickly as possible, my father saw his chance and called the police moments before we even got home. This backfired, however, the moment I approached the officer with a receipt from the Chinese restaurant we were dining at, proving that we couldn't have terrorized my father, as he himself put it, since we weren't even home. After the cops diffused the situation, we had a whooping 2 months of semi-peace before my father's next insane episode. One day, Mom would come home from work and settle in the one small room the judge had afforded her in the prior ruling, just like she had done every day since she was allowed access to the house again. This time, however, my father hurried down the staircase, shoved her into the living room, and locked the door while his girlfriend walked down the stairs as if she owns the place. The moment my father opened the door again, Mom rushed out of there fearing his madness, and in the process, he struck her back with his fist. She screamed in agony, fled onto the street, and screamed for help. My father, being ever the psychotic narcissist, took to the balcony and screamed, "Help! Help!" as if to mock her or even act the victim himself. His girlfriend just stood there and applauded like a massive sociopath. I immediately called the police, and as we waited outside together, my father would stand on the other side of the road and mock us, laughing and telling us that police won't come because he called them before. The one time he was actually wrong. They did come. He then went on a massive tantrum and accused my mother of allegedly lying about her education. She's a mechanical engineer, and how she'll never get a favorable divorce because she lied to me for 30 years. When the police arrived, they were rather mad. 2 younger lads who really didn't want to be there and were just 30 minutes away from the end of their shift before I had called. They got really mad when I asked them to interview my father's girlfriend, and my father just stood there and denied it all, claiming she had left already or that I was imagining things. The more hot-headed cop told my father that either he stops playing games or things will get uncomfortable. Caught in a lie yet again, my father eventually led them down the stairs into the basement but stopped them halfway, saying he had to prepare something. They talked for a good 20 minutes, and I don't know what happened, but when the cops reemerged, they seemed more antagonistic towards my mother and me than towards my father. Months later, we did find out that his girlfriend was down in the basement, drunk like a skunk, and that the cops tried interviewing her. There were 2 more instances before my mom lost the next hearing my father had initiated. The judge was honestly disgusting. No empathy, no decency, and was forced to move out and into her own new home. The first instance happened on February 15, 2024 at 2:20 a.m. We actually installed a security camera in my mother's bedroom. My father called it an invasion of his privacy, but I considered it necessary for my mother's safety. Sure enough, we also caught him sneaking into Mom's room multiple times after installing the camera, so I have it all on film. My mother was sound asleep when all of a sudden my father's girlfriend knocked on her door and woke her up, saying, "Your husband is laying on the floor and puking his guts out." My mother got out of bed, woke me up, and we talked to that woman together, with her frantically explaining to us that she cannot stand seeing anybody puke and that she just wants to leave, and that he's our problem now. She vowed not to return and that it was over and he was an asshole anyways. The usual lies. His girlfriend left, and Mom went into the basement where she found my father. Not much caring for him anymore, she took photos of the disgusting place he had turned his former office into and told him to puke it all out, before leaving him to his misery. Early in the afternoon on the very same day, his girlfriend was back with him. The second instance happened just weeks before the hearing. Again, That judge should be removed from the bench. The way he approached my mother and told her he doesn't much care to hear about domestic violence. NVM that this is a judge who gives interviews to the local Sud Courier newspaper, presenting himself as a champion of women's rights and declaring that no abuser should be allowed to stay in the house, regardless of property rights. Shortly after 10 p.m., my father and his girlfriend started partying loudly. Unlike these two, my mother still works a job and has to get up early, so she went into the living room and asked them to please tune it down a little. My father's response was to get in my mom's face, scream, "You know what, you stupid sow," and then strike her. I woke up half an hour later, heard my mom crying outside, asked her what had happened, and called the police. Police showed up, took a breathalyzer test. He wasn't drunk, and apparently that makes it less worse for German police. They told me if he had been drunk, they would have arrested him that night and questioned him. He claimed he'd never lay hands on Mom, nor ever scream obscenities at her. I proved that a lie by playing back the video. Police said they couldn't see much from the angle of the camera. Even though you can clearly hear him scream obscenities and you can clearly hear the smacking sound, the female cop at least comforted my mom, then everybody went home. The next day, my father cut the wires of the doorbell and disconnected the phone line. I won't say much about the court hearing other than what I've already alluded to. It was goddamn awful, and in my righteous rage, I took to Google reviews. When the court saw that, they threatened Mom's lawyer and told her that if I don't take down the Google review, the judge will press charges against me. I took it down, even though it was factual and not the least bit slanderous. I did call him a misogynist for equating Mom to property. Mom moved out on July 31st, and my father and his new family had a big party on August 1st. Since then, I know that the plan is to have me removed from my home. My father is, unfortunately, also my landlord. Then move his girlfriend's son into my place, his girlfriend's sister into Mom's old room, and eventually the pimp will move into a new apartment my father is currently building in his former office basement, a fact he's keeping a secret from German IRS since he keeps receiving tax cuts for an office that doesn't even exist anymore. My hearing was on August 23rd, and I just received the ruling yesterday. The hearing itself was an insane clown show overshadowed by my father's lawyer's initial actions. 5 minutes into the hearing, his lawyer suddenly held up a printout with photoshopped corpse photos, an obituary, and a Facebook in memoriam. Then he shouted, "You're already dead." That same day, I filed charges against the lawyer, and the Bar Association just emailed me for more information an hour ago. The interesting part is that this isn't the first time I hear about this fake Facebook profile with my name and pics. I first found out about it shortly after a car accident in Mexico back in 2021, when a doctor presented me with it on his phone and told me that my face was all over local newspapers. For the past 3 years, I had assumed this was an insane stalker who did this. I just never would have guessed that the insane stalker is my own father. Suffice to say, I lost the court case, despite earlier assuming I had won, given the judge's reaction and gleeful demeanor towards me, and it appears to me the judge didn't even listen or was fooled by my father's lies. I actually just reported him to German IRS aka Finanzamt after I read a charge claiming I hadn't paid him any rent in 2 years. If he claims that in court, chances are he never paid any taxes on the rent he received. My father now has the legal right to have me removed from my home that I helped to build and paid for diligently. I plan to fight the ruling, but my lawyer doesn't give me much hope that either my legal expense insurance or public legal aid will be willing to cover it. I need to save some money while I find a new job, and I promised somebody I'd travel and see them for Halloween abroad, so I can't just splurge all my savings. I'm hoping for a miracle, as naive as that sounds. Other things I'll just note in a TLDR format, since I'm both angry and exhausted beyond comprehension. I used to have a beautiful large ginger cat, Pudding. Pudding was the apple of my eye, but throughout the years he was locked up by somebody seemingly at random multiple times. During my stay in Mexico, my parents took care of him until he vanished for over a year. My father had always accused the neighbors. He loves to pit people against each other. But when Pudding returned for a brief time last summer, I recognized the bag somebody had dropped him off in. It was my father's girlfriend's sports bag. Coincidentally, one of our neighbors saw my father drop it off from his van. I don't think I'll ever see Pudding again now since he vanished from my home one night after somebody broke in with a replacement key. Rumor has it that one of my father's friends keeps him locked up now, but I have no way to check, and German police treats pets like property, if even that. In 2021, my father scammed me out of $50K. How he did that is something I could fill a whole nother post with. At the time, I had mental issues from a massive personal loss that I thought I could never overcome, so I never even reported him but went straight to Mexico to find myself. When I lost the one person I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with and had to seek psychiatric treatment, my mother visited me twice every week at the depression clinic, talked to the staff about me, and just generally invested a lot of time and money to make me feel better. My father only showed up once, sneered that I should snap out of it and forget the dead, called me a massive disappointment, and walked away. In the past year, he has on multiple occasions screamed that he'd destroy me and take everything from me. He has also threatened to ensure I'd end up in handcuffs if I continued reporting him for his domestic assault. After Mom's move into a new home, she ran for local office, and almost immediately after her victory was announced, my uncle called every newspaper in the area and told them that Mom was a fraud and that she isn't a mechanical engineer. I lost my job last month, couldn't function anymore. My performance dropped and my employer wasn't understanding anymore, after this drama had been going on for way too long, impacting my job performance. Mom recently came clear about details I wasn't aware of myself. 1. My father is a former Stasi agent, East German domestic intelligence, and was, in his military career, stationed near the death strip, which is somewhere the GDR regime would only have placed the most loyal and uncaring individuals who couldn't have cared less if they shot children or the elderly. 2. My uncle's BIL vanished sometime in late 1988. The last people to see him were my father and my uncle, and there's rumors he was killed for an attempt to desert his position and escape into West Germany. 3. Even though Mom still acts shocked about his personality changes, she admits that he physically and psychologically abused my older brother. For her, that's somehow out of character, but I've gotten to know his real self early on in life. When I was in 3rd grade, he molested me and repeatedly punched me while I was sitting in the bathtub. When a teacher noticed all the bruising on my skin, she called CPS. Unfortunately, my father managed to frame a chubby African kid at my school who was sometimes rough to newcomers. The kid and I became got friends eventually, but my father was never found out for his abuse. 4. 5 years into their marriage, my father gave my mom an STD. Both of them had to get treatment, and my father initially played it off as something he must have caught on the toilet, before eventually gaslighting my mom and accusing her of cheating. 5. When my mom first started dating him, my father was simultaneously dating another woman whose fiancé was in the Navy and away most of the time. My mom didn't consider this big enough of a red flag and stayed, and he eventually gave up pursuing the other woman. 6. That I'm alive today is solely my mom's doing. My father tried his hardest to pressure her into an abortion. In closing, I'd like to apologize for the very liberal use of air quotes. I consider it necessary, given all the pretense surrounding my father's new acquaintances. I'm ashamed of being my father's son, to the point I normally air quote even the words father and man whenever I mention him to anybody. I'm not sad about having lost a father because he never was a real father to me. I'm more sad that my mom has to go through this and that my father manages to destroy all my hopes and dreams. Now I'm unemployed again and barely able to work on my Kickstarter-funded game I've been meaning to release for months now. In just 3 days, there's an adventure game jam where I wanted to present a smaller game written in my new point-and-click adventure engine, but instead of being able to focus on that and on finding a new job, or seeking self-employment outright, I'm forced to deal with my father's cruelty and malice.